The thunder came low and slow over Manhattan that night, dragging across the skyline like a warning from something ancient. Inside a tall and crumbling hotel near the edge of the city's breath, an old man sat alone in a room that smelled of static and rain. His fingers trembled slightly as he fed crumbs to a white pigeon resting by the windowsill, its feathers damp, its eyes locked on his. Beside the bed stood a metal coil humming quietly, unplugged, forgotten by the world, but still alive. The walls around him peeled in silence. On the knitstand, a stack of yellowed papers glowed faintly with graphite marks that pulsed like circuitry from a mind too fast for its time. Nikola Tesla whispered things to the pigeon that night, words no one else would ever hear. Dreams of a world not yet built. Visions of devices that could fit in your pocket and speak across oceans. He had written it all before they were ready. A world where wireless signals would carry voices, images, commands, where the earth itself would become a brain, and the air its nervous system. He had seen it clearly, felt it more deeply than anyone could understand. But the world never listened. Not when he offered it, not when it mattered. Now, alone in that dying room, Tesla spoke to the future like a prayer he knew would go unanswered. His last invention, half assembled, blinked softly in the dark, and no one came to see it. No one came to listen. The world he foresaw was already forming, signal by signal, tower by tower, but without his name, without his story. He died before the smartphone, but he predicted it before the telephone was finished. And still we ask, how does a man who imagined the age of information vanish beneath silence? How does a prophet of light become a ghost in the very system he built? And if Nikola Tesla saw our future before anyone else, what did he see after that? Something we were never meant to find. In the summer of 1856, the sky over Smiljan turned black in the middle of the afternoon. Lightning clawed across the clouds, like something alive, and thunder shook the wooden walls of the small mountain village. Inside a candle-lit house, a midwife whispered that the storm was a curse, a bad omen. But the child's mother, Georgina Tesla, pulled her newborn close and said, "No, he will be a child of light." That boy was Nikola, and the world he entered was ruled by things that could be touched: iron, fire, and stone. Electricity had no name yet, no face. Only gods and storms were allowed to carry it. Croatia, in a quiet frontier of the Austrian Empire, was not the place where history expected a prophet. But from the very beginning, he refused to belong. His family were Orthodox clergy, men of scripture and order. But Nikola wandered through fields alone, studying birds and shadows, mimicking the pulse of falling water. At night he dreamed in detail machines he had never seen, languages he had never heard. As a child, he built a water wheel from scraps, and river stones that turned long after the stream ran dry. When asked how, he simply said he imagined it, and then it worked. In school, he recited books backward. Teachers grew afraid of him. They said he saw too much, that he never blinked, that when he looked at a problem, he was not thinking, he was remembering. But even as he was praised, he was isolated. He spoke of invisible forces, wireless energy, towers that could transmit thought. He told his professors that the Earth could be used like a conductor and antenna to transmit information across the globe. They laughed. He did not. Because for Nikola Tesla, these were not inventions. They were facts the world had not caught up to yet. His mind existed 10 steps ahead of his body, and the time he was born into would never know how to carry him. Not in that village, not in that century, but he kept going. Because somewhere beyond the horizon, he believed there was a place where the future could live, and he was going to find it. The journey from mountains to machines did not happen all at once. It came in pulses, like a current learning its rhythm. Nikola Tesla left Smiljan with a heart full of numbers and visions, traveling from city to city across Europe like a whisper in search of a voice. He studied engineering in Graz, electricity in Prague, philosophy in Budapest, but his mind never stayed where his body sat. He stopped taking notes because his thoughts moved faster than paper could hold. In Budapest, while recovering from a near breakdown, he walked the park alone and watched the sunset turn the sky into wires of gold. It was there, under a dying sun, that the motor appeared in his mind, fully formed, rotating, humming, alive. He sketched it in the dirt with a stick. Not an engine like those around him, loud, smoky, dependent on brushes and sparks. His version rotated silently, perfectly, using alternating current that reversed direction like a heartbeat. A motor that could breathe instead of burn. He had no tools, no funding, but the image never left him. He carried it across the sea like a sacred burden. In 1884, he arrived in New York City with 4 cents, a book of poems, and a letter addressed to Thomas Edison. That letter described Tesla as a genius. But Edison, the crowned king of electricity, saw him as a threat wrapped in a foreign accent. Tesla offered to fix Edison's machines. He did, but when he requested the promised reward, Edison laughed and said, "You do not understand our American humor." Tesla walked out and began to build a future no one was ready for. In his small lab, he recreated the motor he saw in the park. It worked clean, fast, quiet. A machine driven not by brute force, but by elegance. Westinghouse heard of it and partnered with him, launching the war of currents. Edison struck back with fear and smear campaigns, electrocuting animals in public, to terrify people into rejecting Tesla's work. But Tesla did not respond with spectacle. He responded with silence. He believed truth would outlast noise. He believed light would win. And in 1893, at the Chicago World's Fair, it did. Tesla lit the entire city with alternating current. No smoke, no sound, just pure, glowing light. For a moment, the world opened its eyes to him. But even then, it could not see everything he had yet to give. The applause that followed Chicago echoed into halls that were never built for him. They smiled at Tesla's lights, marveled at the spectacle of a city glowing like a constellation brought to Earth. But they never understood the mind behind the miracle. The newspapers called him a wizard. The public called him mad. Investors called him dangerous. The moment he stopped performing for them, they turned their faces elsewhere. But he kept working, not for fame, not for wealth, but because the visions refused to stop. He spoke of a world where information could travel without wires. Where voices could ride through the air. Where entire nations could speak across oceans as if distance no longer existed. They laughed, not because they understood, because they feared what understanding might demand. When Tesla requested funding to build a tower that would broadcast wireless signals and energy across the planet, J.P. Morgan gave him a brief nod and a blank check, until he learned that Tesla intended to make the power free, that there would be no meter, no price, no gatekeeping. And then the money stopped. The press followed. They painted Tesla as unstable, erratic. They showed him speaking to pigeons. They ignored the diagrams behind him. No one printed his interview where he described a device that would one day fit in your hand, transmitting sound, images, even documents. In 1926, he said the words out loud. A man will carry a device in his vest pocket, through which he can communicate with anyone, anywhere on Earth. But the world had stopped listening. They had turned their attention to others, to names that sold easier, to minds that played safer. Tesla's truth was too large, his generosity too threatening, because what he dreamed of could not be bought, could not be owned, could not be turned into a weapon. So they buried him in headlines about mental decline. They put bars around his genius and called it eccentricity. Every invention he gave was met with another door closed. Every vision, another name taking credit. Still, he built. Still, he believed. Still, he waited for a world brave enough to understand him. It never came. On a patch of windswept land in Shoreham, Long Island, a tower began to rise, not of stone or steel, in the way men built monuments, but of purpose, of defiance, of something almost divine. It stood like a beacon from a future still unborn, crowned by a copper dome and surrounded by mystery. Wardenclyffe Tower was not just an invention, it was a declaration. Nikola Tesla believed the earth could conduct energy the way veins carry blood. That power could flow invisibly through the ground and sky, reaching every home, every continent, every soul. He built it not for profit, but for liberation. A world without wires, a world without silence, a world where borders could not block voices and poverty could not kill light. He saw the globe as a single living mind, waiting to be connected. Each day, he walked beneath that rising tower in silence, testing, calculating, dreaming. His blueprints held more than electricity. They held language, vision, music all, bound to signals that danced above and beneath our feet, unseen but alive. And just when the tower's bones reached toward heaven, when the last coils were being wound, the letter came. J.P. Morgan, his financier, had withdrawn. No more funds, no more interest. He had learned the truth. Tesla had no plan to sell the power. There would be no meter, no control, no empire. Just light, just freedom. Morgan had funded power, not revolution. And Tesla, with fire in his eyes, had offered both. Without the money, the work stopped. Without the current, the tower died. The workers left. The press stayed silent. The structure stood alone, humming quietly in the dark, for years like a throat trying to speak without air. Tesla returned to New York. Wardenclyffe was dismantled, sold for scrap. Its foundations torn from the soil like a future never allowed to grow. And yet, in that failure, something deeper bloomed. He had proven the vision possible. Even as they erased it, even as they laughed, the signal had already escaped into time. And the tower, though gone, still pulsed in his memory. Each rivet, each coil, each spark reminding him that the world may not have deserved his genius, but it would one day run on it. The man who once lit cities with his fingertips now moved through hotel corridors like a ghost draped in worn black cloth. Nikola Tesla became a silhouette behind frosted glass, a name the newspapers used when they needed to fill silence with eccentricity. His rooms grew smaller, dimmer, filled with pigeons instead of people, notebooks instead of applause. He spoke less. He wrote more. Letters to lost friends, to long-dead patrons, to enemies who no longer remembered his face. The world outside forgot him in fragments. One editor called him a failed mystic. Another said he had gone mad. But they never saw the numbers he still scribbled on torn napkins, the blueprints he folded into his coat sleeves like prayers. They never heard the humming that never left his ears, the music of electricity still alive inside his bones. When people knocked, he hesitated to answer. He had learned that every hand extended toward him was not offering help but asking for something they would never credit him for. The pigeons he fed daily became his witnesses. He named one after a lost love. He said when she looked at him, he saw light no human could produce. The doctors wrote it down as delusion. They did not understand that Tesla had seen beauty in voltage, long before anyone could measure it. As time passed, his patents expired. His name disappeared from textbooks. Others took credit for his ideas. Marconi claimed the radio. Edison claimed the current. No one claimed the man still breathing in a rented room, whispering to birds and holding the future in the lines of his shaking hands. His inventions no longer shocked the world, they confused it. He began to speak of death rays, of machines that could hear thought, of frequencies that could alter time itself. The press mocked him. Headlines called him broken. But beneath those phrases, buried between their laughter, were truths still waiting to be built. His collapse was not loud. It was slow, like power bleeding from a frayed wire. And as the world marched forward into the very reality he imagined, it never once turned back to ask if he had anything more to say. In the dust-laced drawers of a faded brown leather trunk stored beneath his final bed, there lay pages that one read, diagrams that made no sense to the men who cataloged them, and symbols that mirrored nothing known in electrical science at the time. When Nikola Tesla passed, the United States government arrived not with flowers, but with locks and keys. Agents from the Office of Alien Property seized every paper, every scrap, every strange device still humming faintly in the corner of his rented room. They said it was standard. They said it was caution. But those who saw the contents of his files spoke quietly afterward, their eyes never quite steady again. Among the sketches of coils and antennas were calculations for a machine that could transmit visual images through the air years before the television claimed invention. He described the Earth not as ground, but as a conductor alive, resonant, capable of more than just holding us. In one letter, undated and unsigned, he described a device no larger than a hand that could send both speech and image instantly to another device across the globe. It would require no wires. It would run on invisible pulses. It would shrink the world into something one could carry. And it was written in 1901. The very words we now use, frequency, pairing, reception, transmission, were already scratched into margins in his own hand. One diagram eerily resembled the modern cell tower. Another detailed an interface with circular icons around a glass screen. The terminology was crude. The idea was not. No one built it. No one believed it. Or perhaps someone did. Rumors lingered. Of missing pages, files never returned, sketches that vanished after being reviewed by military intelligence. Some whispered Tesla had discovered not just how to transmit energy, but how to store memory in vibration, an acoustic signature that could live in matter. They called it impossible. But the rest of his predictions had already begun to breathe. And still, the public saw none of it. The headlines only mentioned the pigeons. They missed the proof. The pieces were there. But no one wanted to believe that a man long discarded had written the blueprints for the very age that was just beginning to wake. The end came not with applause or discovery, but with silence, the kind of silence that thickens over time, heavy and irreversible. Nikola Tesla spent his final days in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, 26 floors above a city he had once tried to illuminate. He wandered the halls in darkness, refusing entry to all but the maids who brought his meals. The staff spoke of him in hushed tones, strange man, brilliant once, now barely eating, barely speaking. His curtains always drawn, his shoes always shined. Each day he descended to the park to feed his pigeons, speaking to them like old friends. One in particular, snow white with gray tips, visited him often. He told the hotel staff she was his love, and that when she flew into the room, light burst from her eyes so bright he could barely see. No one knew what to make of that. They wrote it off. Everything he said by then was written off. But late in the night on January 7th, 1943, the light went out. A maid knocked. No answer. Hours passed. Still nothing. When they entered the room, they found him lying in bed fully clothed, one hand over his chest, his notes scattered like leaves around the floor. The air felt strangely warm, like something had just left. There was no family, no visitors, no goodbye. The death certificate. Read coronary thrombosis. The newspapers read a few short obituaries. Most headlines called him forgotten. Few mentioned the technology humming silently across the planet that bore his fingerprints. In the hours after his death, federal agents arrived and took his belongings. They called it routine. They called it protocol. But those closest to him knew he had been working on something, one final machine, never built, never revealed. Something he claimed would end war forever. No trace of it was ever found. They said his theories were madness, that he had outlived his own relevance. But as the world shifted towards satellites and global networks, as wireless communication became life itself, the silence around Tesla's final days only grew louder. And now, decades later, we are left with a question that refuses to fade. If the man who saw our entire future died in obscurity, what else did he see before the world turned away? The world that turned its back on him now runs on his breath. Each time a phone vibrates in your hand, each time a satellite whispers across the sky, each time light travels invisibly through the air into another device continents away, his fingerprints are there. Nikola Tesla once stood beneath a tower and dreamed of a planet bound not by wires, but by frequency, not by power lines, but by thought itself. That dream was buried with him, but it did not stay buried. His alternating current became the skeleton of modern energy. His remote control became the parent of every drone, every signal-triggered command. His visions of wireless communication became the arteries of the digital world. And yet, the textbooks still hesitate. The credit still leans toward louder names, names with better press, names that stayed within the rules. But the irony drips like cold metal. Every system that powers our modern world was once the reason he was discarded. The smartphone you carry speaks in the language he defined. The Wi-Fi you depend on pulses with theories he drew, and no one else could understand the diagrams. The GPS that guides your path echoes from the sky through towers he imagined before rockets were built. The men who called him mad are names you no longer speak. The men who ridiculed him have inventions that no longer breathe. But Tesla, the man in the shadows, lives on in the devices that connect the planet. His silence became signal. His exile became influence. He was not just ahead of his time, he was too far ahead for it to ever catch him. The inventions they buried now bloom across the earth, unnoticed by those who use them but essential to every moment. The world has become the mind he once saw in his dreams, a sphere of voices, energy, and light. And yet his name is spoken. As legend, not foundation. We use his world daily, but we still walk over his grave like it is empty. Some names survive history. Others become its power source. Nikola Tesla never built empires. He never hoarded wealth. He never sought dominion over others. What he wanted truly, deeply, was connection. He dreamed of a world where information traveled faster than war, where energy moved without chains, where minds reached across oceans without needing permission. That dream, whispered through coils and lightning, was dismissed, silenced, hidden in footnotes and ridicule. But it grew, quietly, invisibly, until now we stand inside the world he saw before we knew it was possible. And still, we rarely speak his name with the weight it deserves. His blueprints were stolen, his credit erased, his inventions rebranded. But what he created could not be killed, because it was not just technology. It was vision. It was a new way of thinking, one that frightened those who worshipped control. He offered power without wires, communication without borders, light without cost. And for that, they exiled him. Now we hold his dreams in our palms, swiping across glass screens, he predicted before the first transmission even rang out. He saw this life before it was built. But we let him die in a room so silent. Even his pigeons stopped coming. The question is not why they ignored him. The question is how many like him have we missed? How many minds lie buried beneath laughter and labels? How many futures have we already discarded because they arrived too early or from the wrong voice? We are surrounded by Tesla's legacy, but deaf to its origin. So the next time your phone connects, the next time your voice travels into the sky and returns as light, ask yourself this: what else have we forgotten? What other genius have we reduced to myth, while their inventions live in our veins? And if Nikola Tesla saw all of this before anyone else, what vision did he take with him into the silence? Something still lost. Something still waiting. Something that may never return.